Yes, people, welcome to Crime Daily. A pedestrian who knifed a motorist to death in front of his 4-year-old son faces life behind bars after being convicted of murder. Alexander Layton, 34, stabbed James Stockwell inside his BMW after he slammed on the brakes to avoid running him over, then angrily shouted at him on the 15th of May 2020. Layton fled the scene in Thornaby, Teesside, before dumping the weapon, a carving knife, which has not yet been found. He then went camping in Great Ayton, North Yorkshire. He was arrested the following evening in a pizza shop. Layton denied murder and possessing an offensive weapon and tried to claim self-defence, but he failed to convince a jury at Teesside Crown Court, who convicted him of murder after deliberating for less than 3 hours. Layton got off a bus after visiting a food bank when he crossed the busy main road, forcing Mr. Stockwell to make an emergency stop. Mr. Stockwell pulled over to remonstrate with Layton, unaware he was carrying a blade in his rucksack. He repeatedly stabbed the victim while he was sitting behind the wheel, causing him to bleed to death within minutes. Mr. Stockwell had taken his son to see his grandparents, with the youngster strapped into his car seat as the shocking incident unfolded. At the sentencing hearing, James's mum said, "On the 15th of May 2020, our world changed forever. Our only son was taken from this world in the most barbaric way possible. James was my life. I never thought I'd have to live a day without him. I know how much love James had in his heart for his family. Our family will never be the same. We have so much sadness in our lives now. There is no forgiveness in my heart." James's wife said in a statement, "The 15th of May 2020, my life as I knew it was destroyed. I cannot possibly describe the impact that this has had on my family. I am living a life sentence. I am a secondary character in this. James is the main character. All the things he will never get to do. I am now a single mother. I will never be able to accept," referring to James in the past tense. "We were sat in bed when we heard our son had got into the school of his choice. I now stand in that playground on my own, telling a 4-year-old child their father is dead. It's horrendous." Her statement continues, "Harry accepts as much as a child can at that age. Harry has needed therapy because of the trauma that you have caused. A child should not be frightened of opening a car window because of what you..." Alexander's previous convictions are being read to the court. Layton has previous convictions for 22 separate offences. Many are relatively minor, including criminal damage, petty disorder and theft, but he has carried out violent offending. In 2008, Layton was convicted of a violent robbery in Amsterdam. He was sentenced to 3 months in prison. In 2009, he was convicted of criminal damage, where he threw a porcelain vase at a wall and pushed his mother over. In 2015, he was convicted of common assault and battery. He held his mother by her upper arms, causing her pain. He told her she was worthless and he couldn't wait for her to die. In 2015, he assaulted his mother a second time. She awoke to find him holding a pillow over her head while she slept. The aggravating factors of the case are: he fled from the scene and tried to avoid detection. He disposed of the knife. And most importantly, the offence was committed in front of the victim's 4-year-old child. Harry has suffered trauma from what he saw, he told the court. The stabbing was carried out in a public street in front of many people. This was also an offence that may well have been committed whilst the defendant was under the influence of drugs. Layton's defence addresses the court. Brian Cox QC says, "It has accepted that the presence of a child is an aggravating feature and that the crime has a starting point of 25 years. We submit that factors such as the offence taking place in public are relatively commonplace in instances where there is a 10-year uplift in sentencing," he says. The defendant's previous convictions, there is a need for caution. At first blush, they may appear substantial and relevant, but they require some examination. The defendant has his story. It is well documented. We submit that from a very early age, he had a profoundly unhappy childhood, adolescence and adult life. Cox said, "His mental health records is plain, and these are our instructions that at the age of 4 he was referred to CAMHS and then repeatedly thereafter. There had never been any diagnosis of a particular mental health condition, though from time to time ADHD had been identified." Mr. Cox continues, "He has a particularly complex relationship with his mother. He was subjected to grave violence at the hands of his father. It's plain at times that he attributed some responsibility for this to his mother. His mother has supported him through these proceedings and she is present today. He witnessed and was the butt of very substantial domestic violence. No doubt the psychological problems that he has now go back from those formative years. This is a helpful context when one looks at his convictions for violence. I'm told his conviction in Holland was a handbag snatch. He doesn't have a history of using weapons in the conventional sense. In our submission, the mitigating features are lack of premeditation and there is no intent to kill, said Mr. Cox. There is a distinction between the man who intends to kill and the one who does not. These blows were aimed at the leg. The final point we submit is a mitigating factor, is the history of anxiety and depression. We cannot rely on a particular mental health diagnosis, but the long history of depression, clinical depression one assumes, is a factor here. It is a further item we submit under the title of our mental health disability as a mitigating factor. Judge Crowson addresses Layton. You have been convicted of the murder of James Stockwell using a 12-inch kitchen knife. James Stockwell was a happy, successful and proud husband and son and did nothing to deserve what you did to him. He sustained 8 separate wounds from 6 stabbings. One wound passed through his right thigh, severing his femoral artery when you delivered the fatal wound. Mr. Stockwell turned away from you trying to get away. When you left home that morning, you carried a 12-inch knife as an offensive weapon, said Judge Crowson. This is the case that you carried a knife to the scene of a murder. Therefore, the starting point for a sentence is 25 years. Although Mr. Stockwell was a tall and fit man, you attacked him when he was in a vulnerable position, sitting in his car, and you fled the scene. In the car seat, in the rear of the car, was Mr. and Mrs. Stockwell's 4-year-old son, who has been substantially affected by this. You have some relevant previous convictions, including robbery and battery in 2015, continues Judge Crowson. The more recent offences against your mother reveal a violent side to your nature. I accept you have a complex relationship with her. I note that you saying you were affected by the pre-grabbling, but I do not accept that as an aggravating feature. I accept this is a case where you were intent to cause serious injury rather than death, said Mr. Crowson. The one piece of evidence which I found believable is that you aimed for Mr. Stockwell's leg and not his torso. You were carrying a large knife that day, which you intended to use should the need arise. Judge Crowson said, Mr. Cox has referred to a long history of depression and anxiety. Your mental health records show you were diagnosed with ADHD and your depression was a continuous issue. Balancing those factors leads to a minimum term of 23 years in prison, said Judge Crowson. Your sentence is one of life in prison. Yeah, so that's basically the full sentencing hearing of Alexander Layton. Let me know if you'd like to hear more full hearings anyway, people, yeah? Anyway, like, comment, share, subscribe, yeah? Peace.